Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Allie's Conversations. This week, we will be speaking with two gentlemen from our millennial era, for the generation of millennials. We will be speaking about race and sexuality and incorporating the masculine energy in this conversation. I will first, before I continue, let you two gentlemen introduce yourselves, however you choose.
I'll let Jordan go first since this is his first time.
Thank you. I'm Jordan Thayer. I'm from South Carolina. Right now I'm living in West Virginia. I'm a third-year student at the West Virginia University College of Law. And after graduation, I plan to go back to South Carolina.
And I'm Devin. And I also attend the College of Law with Jordan, and I'm also a 3L. So after I graduate, hopefully I go to UCLA. But if not, I'm not quite sure, but we'll see.
You'll be right here going to with your mama. No, I'm just messing with you. I'm teasing. Thank you guys for participating in this conversation. I know when it comes to the topic of racism, it's not very easy. And so I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Today's conversational piece will be about sexuality and racism and the role or the impact that you think that race plays in regards to sexuality. You can take that conversation however you choose. You can either speak from a personal level or basically general based on, imagery, what you see here out here in society, what you've heard, what you've read. Is however you all choose to navigate this conversation. And I'm going to let you two start the converse right now.
You want to go first? Or you want me to go first? Yeah.
I'm not sure where to launch off at, so I'll let you start us off.
Okay. I guess one place to start, I would say, is it's very blatant in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways it's very subtle. And I think one of the most subtle ways it gets you, it's porn. When you're a child, like when you're 12, 13, you don't. You remember like when the other videos I talked about the things, like you experience racism, but you don't know what it is. So like when it happens, sometimes you don't even know that maybe you should address it or tell somebody because you don't even realize like there's a problem like with the way that things are being described. One, I think is a good thing. Like it seems good, but it's not. Or so like for porn, I feel like, especially when it comes to like white and black, like Black Bull or, big black guy, big black cock or whatever, cuckold. So there's certain things that like revolve around like this power dynamic of like either being like the white guy with a black woman, but, he oppresses her in certain ways, but she likes it, or the black guy who like shows like this, I don't want to say, I don't know if this is the right word, over caricature, but basically you're overcompensating for masculinity in this way by like you're having sex with the guy's wife in front of him or something like that. Like there's just so many, and I just when it comes to porn, like there's some, or like like and this isn't just porn too, but like the crazy tiger lady, Asian for like if you're Asian, there's so many things I feel like you don't think about that. Especially when you're a kid looking at it, especially because like you're looking at porn, I'm not looking at like what the description of the words are really. It's kind of just something that captures my attention, know.
Like subconsciously.
Exactly. You want to jump in on that?
Well, yeah. I mean, no, I'm just agreeing with you at this point. Yes.
Yeah, and that's kind of just how I like for sexuality. I think racism is more.
Can we time out?
Yeah.
Just so you know, this is a lot for your mama to hear, okay? So don't pay attention to what's
You're good.
I'm like, my baby looks at porn? Okay. All right, go ahead. Finish. All right, go ahead, honey. Go ahead.
But just like in general, I think it's like Jordan said, it's a subconscious thing, like, and you wouldn't think too much about it. Like even like Black Bull, that doesn't seem like, like too much until you think about like the terminology and the history of Black Bull and certain things, and how Black men and women, but Black men in this case, were sexualized, and certain things that were done. So like, you know, like a big Black strong bull, you know, like a big Black, you're like a work animal, you know, like you're
that's your value, correct? That's the
yeah,
value assigned to you.
exactly.
I see the problem with that.
And the same thing goes, you know, for like just like white men, white women, Asian, anything. Like there's always, you know, there's these certain things like for, you know, for white women, I think for especially for Asian women too, like being submissive. Like you're just supposed to be submissive. You're not supposed to fight back. You're just supposed to take whatever is handed to you, even if it hurts or anything like that, you know. And like I think that that's just like Jordan said again, it's a subconscious thing. It's blatant, but at the same time, it's subconscious because you're not, especially when you're young, you're not thinking about that. You're not thinking about the fact like, oh, like most of these Asian or white women are like very, 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 very submissive. Or like I've noticed that like when it comes to other certain things, like for the most part, the Black woman is strong, but when it comes to like when the guy that her partner is with the white man, that tends to change the perspective. Now all of a sudden it's not about her being stronger anymore. It's like being tamed and certain things like that. But when you're when you're a kid, like who looks at
right, exactly.
Yeah, like, who looks at that and is like, you see Black Bull and you're like, ooh, racism, 1600s, you know, all the things like you didn't come here for that. So
right,
like,
yeah.
and
so
you're
it's
already
building in. Yeah, correct. Well, I guess for me, when, you know, I think of sexuality and racism, the first thing that pops to me is it's not really in the porn industry, but it's just in, you know, in your everyday life. So at dinner and at lunch and stuff, and you go out and you know, you see the interracial couple, but everyone's looking and pointing and saying, you know, hey, you know, what's the problem with this? Why are these people together? Or the interracial couple fears that, you know, they can't go to church, that they can't tell their parents because, you know, I guess the stigma of being with a different race. But for me as a millennial, that doesn't make sense to me, because as a millennial growing up, you know, it's not, racism isn't intuitive, and it wasn't taught, you know, it wasn't taught to me. So when people say, you know, oh, a white person and a Black person shouldn't be together, it's always been hard for me to wrap my head around it, because why not? You know, where does this come from? So I guess my thought is, you know, where do all these long time stereotypes and perceptions and of I'm thinking about how to describe it, but where did the idea that like two races couldn't be together, where does that come from? You know, does that come from like a property thing, like, oh, women belong to men and it's to white men and not to Black men? So that's something that I'm interested in, is kind of the roots of where all of this comes from. And that may not be an easy answer. It could just be that, you know, the good old boy answer of this is the way it's always been. So this is, you know, the way it is now. So yeah, I'm thinking, what do you think? What is your perception of in society? What is the, you know, what is the, in your eyes, what is the why is that a problem in our society, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, why do people take issue with that?
Is that directed towards me or my mom?
Yeah, that's directed towards you. Like, what do you think the, you know, because you obviously have more of a background in a lot of this than I do. I could just tell you, you know, my perception and what I've seen. And
yeah, I think it really depends, because even like going back to the porn thing, where for your question, I think the big root of it, I don't know what drove, or like what was the first thing, you know, that they're like, all right, this is what we need to do and this is how we're going to do it and all that stuff. But as far as like why, I think power, and not necessarily just power, but also greed for something that you may not have, especially. And so like when you want power, you're willing to do certain things to get it. And so, you know, for this country, especially, this ties into the porn thing. One of the biggest things they've done is voter suppression. And for voter suppression, you know, like sometimes the way that they get people to turn against you has nothing to do with your sexuality, nothing to do with your right to vote, nothing to do with anything but the fact that I'm going to play on certain fears that you have. And so if you let this black person vote, or if you let this bill pass allowing at least just black men to vote, then they'll start putting in policies and trying to take your women and trying to do these things, and then you'll have to share this and this and that with them. And I think that amplifies, especially when you don't have anything. And it's like, I already don't have anything, and now you're telling me that these people
are going to take something that belongs to me.
Yeah. Okay. And you already have this irrational fear of them, which may, even aside from that, you already think like just in general, like they might actually take my land and take my wife and do all these other things. And then at the same time, you're also doing the other irrational fears of like, you don't like these people. And sometimes it may be subconscious, but other times it may be you just don't like these people for the things that you've heard and the things that have been done historically and stuff like that. So when it comes to your question, I think like that's what a lot of it holds on to. It's just fear.
So you that to me, you made the connection for me. So let me ask you this then. Is there any I guess, you know, I can speak for myself and in my community, but is there a problem within the Black community of dating outside of your race? Do you think, in your perception, is that an issue?
Like, do you mean like, is it an inherent issue, or more of like the mentality even within my own community? Like, there are people who have an issue with it.
Correct. The mentality of maybe not you, but other people in the community that you think.
Oh yeah, definitely. And
so do you think that's, I don't think that the answer you just gave me, I understand that from my position, but what about from the other side? You know, what's the problem from?
It's still fear.
Okay.
I'd say it's still fear, because for white people, what may have been the fear, or at least for the common white person at the time who doesn't have anything, you know, like it's not common, I think, in general, for people to be, no matter where you're at, most people may be well off, but it's not common for everybody to have wealth. And so for white people, you have the top heavy who are like pushing these irrational fears and stuff like that to keep power. And then you have the common person who's like, if I already don't have much, I don't want to give it up to somebody, especially for somebody who for hundreds of years or for centuries, thousands, millennia, whatever, we've never even considered them equal to us. And now all of a sudden I got to give that up. Where especially approaching modern times, and if you're of color, now there's a distrust. And so, like, especially like we're millennials, so our generation, we're growing up where a bunch of us, you know, like me and you, we know racism exists and we address it to a point, but we also don't care to a point. Like, if you prove to me that you are an ally, a friend, you know, like I can rely on you, you're set, you know. And I still may have like issues or distrust for certain parts of your community, whatever, but I can tell the distinction. Where I feel like the closer you were born, especially to, you know, like civil rights era or like the Civil War and things like that, of course, it makes sense that as far as you're concerned, even if your son, your daughter, you do love this white person, I can't trust them. You know, like I still have this fear, like look at all the things that we've done, all the things that we've gone through, and all the things that are like, okay, maybe you did love me for this period, just like that, you can flip it. On a switch, you can just flip it like that. And now I'm ass out in the wind. And because me being marginalized and of color, there is no recourse for me, especially depending on the time that we're at. So when you change your mind as a white person, especially if you're a woman, it may be different, because at least what women have, a white woman, is like you can say something and then it will be that woman's word. against yours. And if in the court system, if you're like, it's a frail white woman who basically fits the prime example of what you want as a witness or what you want as a victim versus the black man, which is like, this is probably, if you have the black man as your defendant or as your witness, he probably will not be seen as more reliable as the white woman by a jury or by a judge. And that's just how it is.
Yeah.
You know? And so like, I think in terms of that, like when it comes to the black community, it's still fear. It's just different because now the fear is just being reciprocated. You've done things that make me fear you. And for these reasons, I fear. This fear does not allow me to do these interracial relations. And I think today that's where a lot of the older generation, where it's, I see the racism, I see the things, you know, but I love you, you know, like Jordan, you're my friend and stuff like that. Like, it's cool. We've talked, we hang out and stuff like that. But then there are other people who, they may not even necessarily not even like you, but the fact that you're white is just, they can't get that out of their head. You know, like they've had so many experiences and growing up in civil rights era and done all, you know, people being a hose and stuff like that, losing children, people being hung or whatever, that like when I think about it as like, as their age and stuff like that, coming out of that era. And then I see your generation, you know, where white kids are playing with all the black kids, all the Asian kids, everybody's out, you know, kids are more willing to actually call out adults, even when they're young, you know, and like, no, like, you're not going to call my friend that. Like, I will fight, you know, I will fight you. I don't care if you're my dad. You're not going to talk to my friend like that, you know, things like that, where that wasn't common back then, you know, like it was the exact opposite was more common. It was probably more likely that you're all going to get made fun of, or like the kid will be forced to like detach themselves from you because of your color and stuff like that.
Right.
And so like, yeah.
So do you think that this fear, kind of, you're saying like with millennials, it's a little bit different. Do you think this fear and all this, do you think this will dissipate with time, or do you think that there needs to be a change in the institution, or probably a mix of both?
Both.
Okay.
I wouldn't say it will be gone completely.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I wouldn't.
Yeah, because I feel like that. I feel no matter what, that's just like a free will thing, you know. If you have free will, you can think whatever. So there's always going to be at least one person, unless you make some hobby who has that, you know, that one thought. But like at the same time, I still agree that it will take time, but it also needs to be done institutionally. It needs to be done things within institutions and things outside. Outside, it needs to occur just because I feel like when institutions fail, that's when the people need to rise up.
Exactly.
And I think like institutions are important, but it's kind of like the Constitution. The Constitution is only so important until everybody in your society is like, you know what? I don't care about the First Amendment. I don't care about any of this stuff. Everything you're doing is whack. Clearly, none of us like this, and you're still doing it. We're gonna riot, or we're gonna raise up because we're tired of this. Like, you can't keep citing the Constitution and then denying that like 99% of us don't want anything of what you're doing. And like that's how I see it for like the institutional thing. Like the institution, you need to work on the institutions because I feel like they're broken, but they work, if that makes sense. Like the system can definitely work. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not like the system's completely new. Like there have been examples of it throughout history. You just need to clean it up. If you can't clean it up, that's when I feel like either you need to get rid of the system, or if you can't clean up enough of the systems, then you probably need to just get rid of everything. And that's what I'm saying. Like the people need to rise up in that sense. Like,
okay, I gotta jump in. So, all right. So we're talking about, you guys are talking about the institutions.
Yeah.
And forgive me for stepping out for a minute, but your little brother was running around here. All right. So do you think the institutions that have been put in place, which we know is racism is institutionalized, do you think that it plays a role in the sexualization of men? Because I want to focus on masculine energy, okay? That it plays a role in the perceptions of melanated men or any other men in this nation in regards to their sexuality, and what role could could something like the Constitution play in it? Because as we know, there are things in the Constitution that are implied. But anything about sexuality is not implied at all in our laws, policies, or anything, with the exception of something dealing with rape or pedophilia. When it comes to actual sexuality, because if you think about it, racism isn't. So how do we, well, kind of maybe it is, but how do we address that? Well, what do you all think about that? And I know that doesn't make sense because, but what you got?
You want to go first, Jordan?
So yeah, I guess your
right?
question then is I guess I'm not tracking your question. Are you relating? Could you repackage that for me?
Yes, because I needed to repackage too. Is when it comes to sexuality, what role does our institution play in that? Because we do have these stereotypes about sexuality and the racism that has been developed into shaping that sexuality. So what role do you think that the government institution plays in that, or does it at all? Is it something that we as a people are going to have to handle and take hold of this and change? Or should we be expecting our government to do that?
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay. So
yeah.
So from, in my perception, the people are what's powerful. The people are what's great in the nation. So to me, we should give less to the government because the government is proven time and time again that it can't be trusted and then it betrays the people that it works for. So for me, I think we as a people should, take control of this. And I think that we have, and I think that maybe we haven't done it in the right way. Because I think most of the way that kids are socialized on sex is through education and through school. And sure, the government runs the school boards, but I guess it's the people that make the curriculums and stuff. And, even going into school and splitting up in gym class, you go to the boys' bathroom and then to the girls' bathroom. And then, there's just all sorts of other problems associated with that. So, for me, I think the change should be in the people, but to me, that's just, that's such a big project and such a hard thing to ask for. It's kind of like, where do you even start? And I think that it starts with the kids, and that if we can, socialize our kids and expose them to these things at a young age, then these subconscious stereotypes that we were talking about earlier, they won't be, reinforced through their head throughout their life. And I think that will lead to kids who question more and to kids who, want to find out answers on their own and not trust the, school system and all that. So, I think at the end of the day, it comes down to if the school isn't going to teach the kids the proper, or if they're not going to deliver the information we want them to deliver, then it's our responsibility as citizens to make sure that our kids get that information, whether it's in the car on the way to school, whether it's at the dinner table. So I think that, that there's an element of personal accountability with that as well, which is hard to say, but.
So how do we get okay, so if we're going to rely on our citizens, then how do we get our citizens to move in that way? Because I'm seeing we're already having an issue with our citizens, especially honestly speaking from the non-melanated community, just to partake in this conversation of race. And so if we're talking about the sexuality and the impact that it plays in regards to race, and it plays a huge role, as we know, because you have the sexualization of melanated people. And honestly, it also, and I don't think we have this conversation a lot, it plays a role in how it affects non-melanated communities also, because when you start making comparisons against someone who is quote unquote from the African American community to that of the white community, that is the one time where you do see the roles flipped. We're always in our society shown where the white man has power and the black man has none. And so I'm just going to use those two examples. But when it comes to sexuality, those roles get flipped.
Agreed.
It's like the African-American man, he's the one that has the power in the bedroom. He's the big man. And then you have the lessening of the white man, to whereas he's not comparable to the black man in the bedroom. And so how do we get our masses to start recognizing the impact it is playing on all of our communities psychologically and how we view each other? And because it's really, you know, sexuality is humanity's place of basic fear, if that makes sense. Am I saying that right? Like,
yes.
It's that place of where in our sexuality, our femininity, our masculinity, where we are supposed to be grounded. But racism has been used as a tool to unground all of our communities, even though I think sometimes we don't recognize it. So what does that look like in regards to us waking up a part of our community that does not want to? When I say community, I'm talking about, you know, the whole United States of America. You know, a part of our community that does not want to have this conversation. So because, I mean, we're fighting just to recognize that race is a problem and that we have a crisis in our nation. So how do we get people on board to even discuss this aspect of it? Especially through your education, because we all know that everybody, when it comes to education, that's something that causes really big rifts and fights and is considered to be a sacred place.
Mm-hmm.
I think it depends on, again, like, how you view education. So like almost like how you view art. I view almost everything as art. I think science is an art, even though people don't consider science an art. You know, writing a book is an art. So many, even being a lawyer, there's an art. You can't just be like, even though we're going through law school and all these things, you can't just be a lawyer. And even if you pass the bar, that doesn't make you a good lawyer. You know what I mean? Like there's a difference. And so like earlier when Jordan was talking about like the federal government, I noticed this too. Like when I'm growing up, a lot of people, we talk about federal government as if they aren't part of us, as if they aren't citizens as well. And so like I think that mentality is also part of kind of the thing that leads to people like Trump, because you have this thing where you don't recognize that a swamp can't drain itself, you know? So he's like, I'm gonna drain the swamp, but you don't realize because that you're looking at one part of the swamp and it's saying it's gonna drain the other half of the swamp, but it's still a swamp. So like, where does that go? You don't realize that you've dissected these two things, but there's still just one big swamp. And same thing goes for like the federal and the state governments. Like, yeah, they have their separations. And in a lot of ways, and in some ways there are state officials who I would say clearly act like in the best interest of, they try to act in the best interest of their people. But at the same time, you need to realize that a lot of those people who even went to the federal government were citizens, you know? They were born to kill kids just like you. Some of them very poor, you know, West Virginia. They rose up. Now, you know, they're Joe Manchin, you know, and now, you know, and just things like that, you know, depending on, I don't know if Joe Manchin was poor or anything like that, but in general, it's just like those things. And then when it comes to like the institutions in education, I think that's the same way that we need to approach certain things where we try to separate off a lot of things, not realizing how influential it is. So I guess institutional-wise education, I know that you, like Jordan said, you start with the youth at schools, but I think one of the ways that we also educate youth on sex, which I don't know, do you agree with this, Jordan? When you learned about sex, did you learn about it from like talking about it with family and friends and stuff like that? Or was it like you got little hints of it from listening to music? And then, you know, when you heard something, you're like, what's that? You know, yeah. I got a question. What? Yeah.
It started with pop culture and then it evolved into the question.
Yeah. What's peaches and cream? Oh, you know, you know what I mean?
I knew what sex was before I knew what the birds and the bees, that was a code word for sex. So, you know, to me, it was kind of backwards the way I was exposed to it.
Okay. And it's things like that is what I'm saying though. Like how you're taught, and then how you refer. Like you may learn about sex, and then you hear that, and you start hearing a bunch of pop cultural references and terms and stuff like that. What are these? You know, and it's interesting just because I think I told you about it's a quote from Plato's or Socrates, if I'm not mistaken. Either Plato, Socrates, or Aristotle. But if you control music, then you control society. And I think that that's really true, especially when you look at how hard the government and business, like private or public businesses, have tried to control music. And you can even look at the music industry today and see that like there's clearly a direction that you want the image of certain genres to go. And so I think that that is a big educator on certain things, especially when it comes to sex, because you may hate a song, but if it's constantly playing in your ear on the radio or whatever, you know, everybody around you is singing it. And, you know, and it's like, I think Cardi B's funny. I think she's hilarious. I think she seems like a cool person. She actually does care, and she does certain things. At the same time, I would not say that she is the best image for women in general. But at the same time, I can see like, whoa, some of the my bad, someone on the computer. Like I can see why people can feel empowered and beneficial from like listening to her and stuff like that. At the same time, if she became the face, let's say, of hip hop, would you think that that is the most beneficial thing for your community and for that art as a whole, where it doesn't rely on certain, you know, I guess I want to say.
Well, I mean, I could appreciate the empowering aspects, but the lifestyle aspects, what's problematic, I think.
Exactly, and it sets an unrealistic standard, which is like, I get, do what you want to do and be what you want to be and try to make the world a better place and all that, but the chances of you getting out here and referring to yourself, you know, as the baddest bitch, as a hoe, as a slut or anything, talking about, you know, sucking dick or whatever, and making money off that, you know, and doing it. I'm just saying, like, all these things, and then making money off that, living comfortable, and not only living comfortable, living intergenerationally comfortable, you know, where you are not only set, but, you know, Jay-Z, Beyonce are set, so are their children. If Jay-Z and Beyonce died right now, I guarantee you both of them probably already have a will. Ivy is set. She will be fine. Her kids will probably be fine because of the amount of wealth and everything, the steps that they've taken. But that's not common and things like that. And even then, you see Jay-Z has slid out of rapping about drugs and all those other things. Like, still mentions it from time to time, but he's slid way more into now, I'm just going to drop knowledge. And things like
I'm going to jump in. Yeah. I hear everything that you're saying. It's been and it's valid, but that still didn't address what role do we down here play in regard to that, because if we cannot rely on the government to help us address the sexualization, because make no mistake, Cardi B's music plays into that.
Yeah.
I mean, it plays.
That's what I meant earlier when I said that we are the government. I think that's what I'm saying, when we try to separate ourselves into, like, if the government doesn't do anything, then what are we supposed to do? But the Constitution literally says, we the people. You know, like, and that's why I keep saying, like, I think that is one of the biggest mentalities. It seems subtle, but I think it's a lot bigger than what it seems, just because your Constitution literally says we the people. But whenever we get into a conversation about accountability, especially when it comes to like state, federal, or the people or citizens, we talk about the federal government as if it's not, as if it's not full of citizens. And I think that's the thing, you know, like me and Jordan in law school, so we know what a citizen is. We know that everybody in the federal government is a citizen. Yet when we talk, and even like all of us, like we have a natural tendency to slide into like, this is the government. These are the people, you know, this is the federal government. This is the state. And even this is the state government. This is the people. Like, even when it gets to the state government, you still separate it out to like the people, even though you know well that they came from here. My bad, Jordan, you go.
Yeah, dude. And I think the point that you're making even addresses race relations in America, is that why is there this natural tendency to have an us versus them? because the government is there to help us. But still, even knowing this, you know, it's still us working. We feel like we're working against them, but it is who we are. And I feel like race relations is the same thing. It's like a you versus me mentality. But just like this conversation's gone along, when you get to the bottom of it, it's not you versus me. It's kind of like we, you know, if you start defining things more accurately, it's like, okay, well, we're all just people, and that we're part of the government, and that, you know, what is race other than a social construct, really? So
yeah,
I like the points that you're making.
Thank you. And I think it goes down to like Jordan said too, even with the we factor, how like it's weird too, because even when sexuality and racism, it really is kind of like us versus them thing, you know, like who has the biggest dick or who lasts the longest, you know, who most submissive and stuff like that, you know, like even when you go through porn and things, you look at there are certain titles that stick with certain things. They will always be with certain things. They make it like this, you know, or like they'll give it like a racist, aggressive title, something, you know, like clearly people who would click on this link will probably be white people more leaning towards like alt-right and stuff like that. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like you like, I feel like when you're a kid, you don't think about that, but now, you know, it's like when you see these things, you're like, that's really messed up. Like that's actually not. It's almost reportable on a porn site. like it's wild, and I don't know. I think when it comes to the things that we need to do to fix it, it really is just like you gotta policies. You gotta talk to your kids, like Jordan said as well. Music.
I think another alternative route, which would be really effective, is to start offering these types of discussions and courses to coaches, because in my school, the least segregated group of people were the athletes, and that's because they're in the locker room every day. They lift in the same way every day. They're running on the same grass every day. They're the people who know that, hey, we're all the same, you know. So I think that if we can get, you know, instead of in homeroom, you know, maybe having a race discussion, you know, maybe we should get coaches to start addressing these subjects and things like that, because that, you know, and that's in my experience and at my school, and it might be different at other schools, but from my experience, it seems like the people who helped race relations the most were people who were on sports team and stuff. And so I think that, you know, a possible avenue is looking at, you know, sports and coaches and things like that. But at the end of the day, for me, when we're talking about, you know, sex and in race, when people have these stereotypes, they're really hard to break, and people are going to defend them. So instead of looking at, hey, let's break these stereotypes, it's still my position that let's just change the future. Yeah. You know, let's start with the youth and we change the future. So that's kind of, you know, that's really my outlook.
I think Jordan's bringing up something we've mentioned in other videos, which is after a certain point, I'm going to stop talking to you. And I'm going to just do what Jordan says. I'm going to just focus on the youth. I'm going to focus on getting the people who have not been tainted.
Right, exactly.
And so, like, because you've clearly, like Jordan said, you've clearly decided you're not changing your mind. But I know for a fact that what I'm doing benefits all of us. Exactly. So you know what? I'm going to go to these kids. If something's wrong, they'll let everybody else know.
Like, but that's a hard thing to say, because, you know, it's like you don't want to think that some people are just hopeless and that, oh, this will get better in a couple years, because for how many years can we keep saying this? You know, in 15 years, are we going to say, oh, the next generation will get it right? And in 15 years, the next generation will get it right. You know, so these are just problems in our own discussions. That's like, you know, it seems like a cop out, but
I don't think it's a cop out though. I think it's less of, you know, the next generation will get it right, and literally that's just how life works. The next generation will get it right. Not only will they get it right, they'll get it better. And that's what we're trying to make. And obviously throughout history, there's always lulls, you know, like society or something that happens that society hits a real low. But I think we've also seen historically, we always peak, or we always start rising again. We may hit a peak, but then when we fall back down, we exceed higher than that peak that we left before us. And I think that's what we're trying to reach, especially when it comes to sexuality and stuff like that. And it's interesting that you mentioned like the locker room and stuff, because I feel like it's the least segregated in many ways, but it's also the most segregated, because I feel like it's also like police departments, like in a lot of ways, like it forces you to breach that barrier, but it's also kind of like a Brown v. Board, where, you know, now schools are desegregated, but they're not actually desegregated in a lot of ways. So like you force yourself into this position where like I have to be around people, like I have to be around diversity. At the same time, some people benefit from that in the sense of like they'll actually learn and they'll better themselves for it. They'll be surrounded, you know, like, oh, I've never really been around this many white people. I've never really been around this many black people. I don't know some of the norms and traditions or some of the things that like this offends them more or stuff like that. But on the other end, kind of lost my train of thought there. But oh yeah, at the same time, you are also, you never truly address that barrier. So it's less like you broke the whole barrier down and more of you put a gap in it and you squeeze through. So everybody can get in, but the barrier is still there. So that's the one issue that you have. Not everybody can just come flying in, but at the same time, you're getting something in there. But now the issue comes into, I think this is where a lot of people go into it's like for racism across the board is, you know, like, but now, you know, like there's mixed people in schools. There's interracial relationships. First black president. Look, we have black people on the Supreme Court. You know, like, where's the racism? Yeah, it's simple things like that. And I think the same thing goes for sexuality. Is kind of just like a lot of people don't see the issues when it comes to, especially kids. I've seen that a lot more. Sexualization of kids, which is really weird. And I don't know how to address that through the lens of racism. Although I do think it happens a lot more to kids of color, especially like I know that you're having the event like is it on missing kids of color or just like kids in general?
Oh no, we're doing the conference is on marginalized children in the struggle, the beauties and the struggles that they face, and so we'll be addressing the issues, bringing awareness to issues in the Native American, the African American, and the Latino community.
Okay, I got it. Oh, sorry. For kids, especially, this is one thing actually I'll pull up that I think it's biggest, and it affects women the most, especially women of color, black women, for having curves, not for wearing anything inappropriate, for simply the fact that you have curves, you are a bigger woman, you know, you're thicker in certain ways and stuff like that. You fill out the clothes a little more. Now all of a sudden, the same jeans that this girl is wearing next to you, the same shirt and same all that stuff, it still fits you. You just fill it out more. Now all of a sudden it's, you have to wear some different pants, or you have to wear a different top, or you're distracting. One of the worst ones, I think, for just females in general, you're distracting the boys in the class or something like that, you know, like, because I'm being distracted, she has to change her whole life, like, plan, you know, like, you can't wear these clothes anymore. You can't speak like that. You definitely can't look like that. In fact, I don't even think you can be 10 feet within my range. I can't control myself. You know? Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And I think that is one of the ways that we could definitely address youth. I think that goes back to Jordan's thing where not only does the conversation need to be had in school, but they need to be had at home. But also when they are had at school, there needs to be serious, kind of like in the last one with Amina and Isabella, there needs to be serious input from the village, whether the school likes it or not. Like, you know, like, you're not going to have our kids and make rules and all these things where we get no real input and stuff like that, which happens a lot. And you're a teacher too, so I feel like you probably know, like, depending on where you're at, that can happen a lot. Policies that, like, social media monitoring, for instance, and stuff like that. Things that make no sense. At least no sense without parental consent. And I feel like that's, and so, like, when things happen like that for, like, girls, especially kids of color, I feel like a lot of times those things are like, that kid will be humiliated. You know, now this girl is like, oh, wow, I got called out in class, you know, for being me, you know, for having something that's common amongst my people. And now you like, oh, what was I about to say too? And now just, she has to kind of live with she has to live with that, you know, like that will be on the back of her head. And I feel like that's where a lot of kids also get caught up. And we need to find ways to make it so like we are very pertinent to the construction of schooling systems and policies like that. And it's not just good enough that we have this town meeting where you give you just like, what is it like, just surface. It's just very surface conversation, very little things. Or like when people come in, you know, like in Chicago where Chance the Rapper comes in to speak about, you know, bettering the education system, providing safer environment, you know, sexually, physically, everything for the kids and whatnot. And the superintendent for that district leaves. And it's fine that he leaves, as long as everybody else stays there, you know, like that. Those are the issues and the battles that we are facing when it comes to like fighting sexuality and racism, or fighting racism in regards to sexuality and stuff like that, where even when our kids are sexually targeted, or even when we are sexually targeted, you know, we know the statistics, how many rapists are actually, you know, arrested or go sent to prison for how long? Brock Turner, you know, if he had been black, Brock Turner would have went to prison for life, and he got 3 months. He got 6 months total, but he got off in 3 for good behavior, for raping a girl behind a dumpster, and then running when getting caught. Not only did you commit rape, when you got caught, you tried to run, and then say that you were just helping her. You know, like, yeah. And it's things like that is what we're dealing with. Where even when we do try to address sexual assaults and sexual issues and racism and stuff like that, then it's like you almost like you get a merit or demerits for the color of your. I mean, it is, you basically get merit or demerited for characteristics of yourself. Oh, you're black, you most likely probably getting years. Oh, you're low income, that's some more years. Your parents did drugs or they were arrested before you too, and like they're incorporating this into like the court systems now too. Like those do count on your record. So the simple fact that you're a guy, you know, like you're just your sexuality or like your sex, that can get you more points. You know, where if you're a woman, that may get you less points. And I don't know if that's constitutional across the board, but I think that there are some places that do certain things like that. So like you're basically just getting points off on who you are, your sexual orientation, or not your orientation.
Yeah, even your orientation. Yeah, I think.
Yeah,
I've seen that where, you know, the prosecutor's main hook point was like, hey, this was a gay man, so obviously he molested this child because gay men molest children, you know. So, and
if that's the mentality in the state, you know, like that, a lot of people probably think that's unconstitutional. You just can't make that argument. I'm like, well, I mean, if you're in the Bible Belt, you know,
it doesn't take a legal scholar to tell you there's something wrong with that argument. Right there, you know, you don't have to go to law school to know that.
Yeah, and it's like what we were doing right now. Me and Jordan just talking, and it's easy. You know, you say something, and all of a sudden a whole new issue.
Exactly. And something that no one had ever really, you know, thought about before, and I think that that's. Yeah.
And how do you address that, especially in an issue where it's the Bible Belt? And that's why I keep saying, like, the Constitution only holds so much weight, because there are plenty of things that are unconstitutional. But if you have enough people in your state who are down for it and not enough people who can actually take it to court and fight for it, you know? I mean, because think about abortion. That's another thing, sexuality, you know? So why? You should be able to get an abortion legally and it should be unimpeded. But we know that states go out of their way in bad faith to make it harder for women to get abortions. Somehow it's still constitutional. Even though we know the policy serves no benefit to society, You literally created this policy because you're trying to make it harder to get an abortion. And the only reason it's fine is even though we're supposed to have a separation of church and state, you know, all people have to say is, you know, if enough people vote on this policy, regardless of their intent and the reason for what they did it, they can hinder a whole demographic. You can hinder women in general. And
all right. I'm gonna jump in because I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off because it was getting really good. But I know that our time is winding down. And I wanted to kind of get ready to close off this segment, Millennials, Race, and Sexuality concerning the masculine energy. And so is there anything that I'm gonna give you both 60 seconds. Jordan, you can go a little bit longer because, you know, Devin was feeling himself. I'm just teasing. I'm teasing. I get to be hard on you. You're my son. In the most loving way, though. Is there anything that, before we close off, that you all would like to say in regards to the masculine energy and the impact that racism has on it in regards to self, community, or society? And when I say community, meaning your own community and how you see that, how that's viewed. I'll give you guys 60 seconds and then we will go ahead and close off here. I really hope that, you guys are going to come back for when we put the girls and the guys together, right?
I would love to come back. I hope I get invited back. Yeah.
Oh, yes, please. You are invited. Okay. You are invited because you all, both groups, you guys dropped some really, really poignant nuggets. I mean, you guys said some really good stuff. And I think this conversation actually needs to really, really continue on in regards to the sexualization of communities. And I mean all communities, because until I was listening to you both speak, it never, and I'm gonna be honest with you, it never dawned on me the impact that the sexualization of race even plays on non-melanated communities. Like when I started to have this conversation, I really thought that it might really focus on the melanated communities, African American, Latino, and Native American. And I was wanting to hear the white perspective of it, the non-melanated perspective. But then after I'm listening, I'm like, wait a minute, they're impacted too. Mm-hmm. And so I really think that, you know, getting all of you all, the feminine and masculine energy together on the same video conference and discussing all aspects of this conversation, I think is much needed. Like it needs to really be delved into. So now I'm going to stop and I'm going to give you guys your 60 to 90 seconds.
Okay. So I guess for me, at the beginning of this conversation, you know, talking about sexuality and race, for the dominant, powerful Black man in the sexual sphere, I think that may create animosity from white people towards the Black man, like Devin said, for fear of losing their position. But at the same time, is the powerful, dominant Black man not what we want in our communities? I mean, to me, that's a positive, right? Not a negative. So it's a weird cross section because it's like the sexual representation, it's negatively affecting race relations. But that representation, to me, is like a positive representation because it's, you know, I think that we need, you know, strong leaders, not men, but just, you know, strong people in general. So I just think it's an interesting dynamic that, you know, for one race, it can, I think it's scary that for one race, it can be empowering and it's taking power away from the other race, because when you have that dynamic, you're never going to have, you know, equality or something, because as long as someone's pushing back, equality is never going to exist. So
as for me, I see what Jordan's saying. I would say that I think it's more towards it's less of who is involved and why. So like, it's important that who is involved, but the issue is not just you're a strong black man, but it's you're a strong black man, like Jordan said, you want to take something away. You want to make me feel inferior. You want, like, it's a detriment. In some fear, it brings a detriment to me. And it may not even be an actual plausible detriment. Just as long as I can get you to believe that this is a likelihood or this is a problem. I think that's what racism in regards to sexuality and in general, honestly, really preys on white people especially, but also community of color. But white people especially in the sense of, for community of colors, the fear is more, I think, actual harm being done to, which is literally just, that's the history of it. Like, not only threats, but then following through with the Atlantic slave trade, with the Trail of Tears, you know, actually making atrocities occur. Where for white people, it's, if I can scare you enough, I can make you create a policy. Like the, 9/11. 9/11 occurs, Patriot Act. It didn't matter that nothing, at the end of it all, we found out literally almost everything is a lie. What mattered was at that point in time, I had you scared enough to hand over your power consensually. You were willing to just give it up. And I think that's the same thing for like racism in general when it comes to fear and sexuality. As long as I can make you fear that, that's all that it takes.
Then the power's still there. Then
yeah, and subconsciously, and that's why I think porn's very detrimental, because you see that, like studies have shown that you see those things when you're 12 to 13, maybe even younger. And that's at a time like nobody's, you know, you're not watching porn with your parents or anything like that. Nobody's giving you guidance. So you're just seeing these things and subconsciously you're just growing with that. And then think about like subconsciously, like you see things and your brain remembers it. It's like, oh, that was an important thing. You're not really thinking that, but subconsciously your brain's like, oh, let me snatch that out the history book. I remember that. You know, you just grow up with it. You know, you're learning racist policies, you know, things like mentalities that don't make sense, or even the way that things are worded in textbooks. You know, they further enforce those things that
reinforcement. Yeah.
I don't know. It's crazy. Just like how you said, like how something can be to the detriment of all while looking like it should be to the benefit of somebody. And maybe it does bring benefit in some short-sighted tangible way, which is why I think for racism, like the fear, it looks good because you have all the wealth and stuff like that. But, you know, climate change, you know, what good is wealth without a planet? You know, so it's like, it ends someplace. It looks good in the short term, but someplace in the long run, I feel like we always see that it eventually, it's not sustainable.
Thank you both, gentlemen. Thank you for participating in such a difficult conversation. Even though as you always have it, as you two were having it, it didn't appear to be difficult. But thank you for participating in the conversation that people don't like to talk about, sex and race. Sex and race, yes.
Well, thank you for giving us a platform, because, you know, as hard as it is to talk about these things, it's even harder to ask other people to talk about them. So
it is.
Thank you again for helping.
Thank you. And everyone else, thank you for tuning in to Allie's Conversations. The next time we will be bringing both people from both panels to collectively have this conversation. Everyone take care, and my righteous warriors, let's continue to righteously put this nation back to where it's supposed to be, that the framers intended it to be. See y'all later. Bye-bye.